The NCAA tournament is rolling into the Sweet 16, but none of the 5 Virginia teams made it past the first round in Indiana. We'll look at what went wrong for the Hokies and Hoos and what's next for those teams, and we'll talk about the sour ending for VCU's season. All that and much more this week on Teel and Barber. Welcome in to episode 46 of Teel and Barber, the Richmond Times-Dispatch and Richmond.com's Virginia Tech, UVA, and ACC sports podcast. I'm Mike Barber, ACC beat writer for the paper, and joining me here, as he always does, my co-host, the 13-time Sports Writer of the Year and the Virginia Sports Hall of Famer, David Teel. David, how are you, sir?
Good morning, Mike. I'm well. Hope you're the same.
I am. I've recovered from the travel. It was nice to get back to traveling. David and I both were in Indianapolis for the NCAA tournament, but it also takes some getting used to, getting back on a plane, spending nights in hotels, all that fun stuff. Now, we're both back, I think, kind of surprisingly quickly from our short stay in Indy, site of this year's NCAA tournament. David, we're going to talk a whole lot about what happened in the various games in Indiana this past weekend. But first, just your general take on being in the bubble, covering the tournament, how it's all working for the teams, for the media. What were some of your big takeaways?
Well, it's just as peculiar as the entire season, with limited crowds and just, you're used to the bands and cheerleaders and, the place going crazy when the underdog rallies, and there's just none of that. And it's just a different vibe. But as Tony Bennett had said throughout the season, it beats the alternative. And the alternative in 2020 was no March Madness. And to have it back this season was beyond welcomed. Yeah,
I had a kind of fun experience after the teams we cover were knocked out. I was able to get myself into the Rutgers-Houston game, which is, of course, my alma mater. And I spent part of it sitting in the stands. I got a couple of tickets, sat up in the stands. And if you sat in a crowd of people who were really into the game, you felt a little bit like you were really at March Madness. And then when I went back to the media seating, you realize it was just a small pocket of people. Right. And when you get the scope of, that one was at Lucas Oil, the big arena, the black curtain down the middle because it's a football stadium, an NFL stadium. It was interesting. I thought that the games we were at and some of the extra ones, I thought they had the best atmosphere that we experienced all year. And it was still such a far cry from what we're used to in an NCAA tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just, I'm glad for everybody who got to play, and we'll get into this later. 52 games were on the schedule, but only 51 got played. And you just ache for VCU.
Yeah, it was hard to not have that be the number one kind of takeaway or thing it was the thing I was thinking about on the flight home was, man, VCU, all that traveling, all that getting there, all that emotion of being ready to play and then to have it taken away from you. Now, the games we did cover, David, they were in a couple of fairly iconic venues as far as basketball goes. Obviously, Indiana. It is so basketball crazy there in Hoosier land, as our producer, Dean Hoffmeyer, likes to explain to us. And the first one being at Butler, being at Hinkle Fieldhouse, that was the first time for both of us. What was that like for you?
Oh, it was great. I wish we'd had more time to just explore the arena itself and just wander the concourse and look at the old photos. But that just wasn't possible the way the NCAA set it up. And I'm not complaining. I understand why they limited time in the building and why we needed to exit to make way for the next group because there was a game following ours. But it was curious, Mike, and I know you noticed it as well, that having the sunlight come in through those big windows, at one point you thought it was affecting the play on the court. That, players couldn't see. It's almost like losing a fly ball in the sun. But but still, to be in that building, and most of us remember the movie Hoosiers, and it was cool. I love sports cathedrals, and whatever the sport, football, basketball, baseball, all of them. And to have the privilege to sit in that one was great.
Yeah, I've got a good friend who has spent some time covering Indiana and Butler and Purdue out there. And when he saw the TV and the light coming in, he texted me and he said, Hinkle Fieldhouse with the sun coming through the windows, that means you got the good stuff. It is. It's special. And then the same I thought, because I had never been to Assembly Hall out in Bloomington, Indiana's arena, and walking in and seeing particularly the 76 banner from that undefeated Bob Knight team. I thought that was a cool setting too. David, had you covered a game at Assembly before?
I not covered a game. I'd actually been in Assembly before to do some interviews, but never a game there. I was there during the off season and had seen the banners and such. But yeah, it was cool seeing a game. I found Assembly a little more antiseptic just simply because of where we were seated.
Yes.
Up in the rafters virtually with your head scraping the ceiling. And that far removed from it, it just wasn't as intimate to me as Hinkle was.
Yeah, I'm curious. I would love to go back and all of these places. It's great to see them with a full crowd, but you're right. I mean, we were closer to the pearly gates than we were to the front gate with our seats at Assembly. So that may have kind of clouded our image of that. But those two experiences I thought were really cool. And I said I saw a game at Lucas Oil, which the atmosphere I thought was the best of the three. But it doesn't compare to the history and the tradition of a place like Hinkle or a place like Assembly Hall. Now, we'll start in Assembly Hall. We'll start with Virginia. I'm not even sure how to approach this one. On the one hand, the Cavaliers, they won the ACC regular season title. They earned a 4 seed. And then they got beat by a 13 seed out of the MAC. On the other side, UVA was on a COVID pause. It didn't practice until the day before its loss to Ohio. It only arrived in Indy the Friday before its Saturday game, and it played without Justin McCoy. So, David, on a scale of I'm stunned the ACC champs are out to everyone could see this coming, how surprised are you that the Wahoos were one and done in Indy?
I picked them to win in my bracket, Mike, but Ohio was a very popular upset pick, and understandably so. So on the surprise meter, not much at all. I mean, we've never seen a team try to compete in an NCAA tournament under these circumstances. Literally no practice until the day before the game. And that was very brief in Charlottesville before they hopped on a plane to go to Indianapolis, to go back into quarantine, to go back to having to pass 2 more rounds of tests before they could have a Saturday walkthrough and then bust out to Bloomington for the Saturday night game against Ohio. Unique doesn't even begin to describe that preparation.
Yeah, Tony Bennett described it during the week as not ideal. Here was Tony Bennett after the loss.
We wanted a chance to play in this tournament. We got the chance. And first credit to Ohio for how they played, well coached, and they played tough, and they made some big plays down the stretch. But, our guys were, again, hopeful that we'd get this opportunity. The NCAA allowed us to come in and, in a unique way, but thankful for it. But it just stings right now to not advance in this tournament. It's such a special tournament. Don't know if we got tired down the stretch or, felt, a little bit of the pressure, but thought we got some good looks and just had a pretty poor shooting day, a very poor shooting day from 3 with some quality shots. But again, they did a solid job defensively.
Virginia, it's interesting, Tony, talk about maybe fading late there. Defensively in the first half, David, I thought they were dialed in and they looked like they might dominate this game. They couldn't shoot straight all night, and that certainly could be losing your touch, having not been on the court, not getting to do that kind of work. But right at the start, the way they were playing defensively, David, I had a good feeling for where this was headed for Virginia. Did you?
Yes, and for a couple of reasons. because I thought eventually some shots would fall, probably foolish on my part. And as you mentioned, they were so locked in defensively. At one point, Mike, Ohio had committed 9 turnovers and UVA had committed 1. And UVA ended up with a season low 3 turnovers. Well, if Virginia's only going to turn it over 3 times, 99 times out of 100, they're going to beat you. But this was Virginia's worst shooting performance of the season, 35% and less than 30 from beyond the arc. And that just wasn't good enough. And then late, the defense cracked and Ohio got some back cuts. And then Ben Vanderplas, just hit some daggers there from deep on the left wing. And when those two went down, it was over.
Yeah, and UVA fans, avert your ears, but the Vanderplas story was pretty cool. That'll be something I remember. Ben Vanderplas is the son, of course, we talked about this last week, the son of Dean Vanderplas, who was a college teammate of Tony Bennett's. They showed on the video board at assembly kind of a split screen that had Tony Bennett, Ben Vanderplas, and Dean Vanderplas in the stands, kind of pumping his fists and cheering when his son hit those big shots. And to me, that was a really cool March Madness moment, although obviously it worked against the team we cover.
Oh, absolutely. And I thought, Tony Bennett afterward, sought out Ben, and that was really nice. And yeah, it is an absolutely wild story, and to think that he was at least late essentially the cause for UVA's demise.
Yeah, for him to have that starring role just kind of ratcheted that story up another notch. And you mentioned, Tony Bennett finding him on the court, and he asked, where's your dad sitting? And he pointed up so he could kind of wave to Dean. And, a lot of love and respect between those two families. But Ben Vanderplas with the daggers on that night for the Bennett clan and team. David, how much of, because you mentioned just a terrible shooting night, the worst of the season, the defense fading late, how much of this do we attribute, and I know it's impossible to know for sure, but how much do we attribute to just being out of rhythm from not having practiced?
A lot. Mike, if Virginia has normal prep, Virginia wins this game. That's just, I'm convinced. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll never know, but Virginia's better than Ohio, and with equal prep, the Cavaliers win.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. And I thought Ohio was pretty good. I thought they played really well. But yeah, just comparatively speaking, Virginia at its best wins easily. I thought Virginia, even with its middle game, probably advances, and we just didn't get that. And it's not a criticism of Tony Bennett or the players. As he said, not an ideal way to prepare, and the way they came out, you thought, okay, maybe they were going to pull it out. And I went into the tournament worried, hey, they were going to win the first one on emotion, right? And just go so hard because everything they've been through, win that first game. I was worried about how flat they might come out for round 2, but of course they never got there. Now, you look at the career, for example, of Jay Huff, right? He was on the Virginia team that lost to UMBC. First 1 seed to lose to a 16, all of that. He was on the team that came back the next year and won the national championship. Then he was on the team that didn't get a tournament in 2020 because of a global pandemic. And then he was on this team that had essentially 24 hours to get ready for its first game of the tournament coming off a COVID pause. David, that guy's seen it all.
No one will have a more tortured NCAA tournament career than Jay Huff. No one will. And I'm sure, given the national championship, he wouldn't trade any of it, and nor would I. And by the way, anyone who tries to link UMBC to Ohio in an attempt to strike this narrative that Virginia fades in the NCAA tournament, it's just preposterous. The two are completely unrelated.
Yeah, it's such and we saw it back in Chicago, right? When Virginia lost to Syracuse in a game that, in all fairness, Virginia should have finished that off. Yes. The Syracuse press just collapsed them, and no doubt that was a choke moment right there. But the narrative then was Tony Bennett's system can't win a championship. It can't get you over the top. And then, when the UMBC loss comes, that just intensified. And then they went out and won a national title. And it seems like there's still this cluster of media or fans, opposing fans, who still want to come back to that narrative. They've already shown you they can win a national championship. And I don't get the vibe that Tony Bennett is ready to hang it up in terms of coaching. He's a relatively young coach. So I think it's kind of a stupid storyline, honestly, that it pops up. But for whatever reason, and it's probably mostly about the style of play, anytime Virginia loses in March without a national title now, it feels like this is going to be something people are talking about.
It's quite possible. And nothing about the 2020-21 sports year should be overlaid into any kind of long-term narrative. Not at UVA, not at any other school, not in any other sport. This athletic calendar is unique unto itself, and it's all framed by COVID, all of it.
I agree 100%, and I won't get up on my soapbox and I won't shout because I know my mic is running a little hot, but it's why I go back to the thing about firing coaches in this sport calendar year. It just seems ludicrous. You get your team from point A to point B. To me, you should be retained, and I know that's not the way it is. It's not the real world, but I'm with you 100% in terms of how we evaluate teams, and I think that kind of brings us neatly to this week's Take It or Leave It.
Thank you, Mike. Very blunt question here. Virginia fans should be happy about the season the Hoos gave them. Take it or leave it. Let's start with David.
I'll take it. They absolutely should be happy. Number one, they should be happy they had a season. Number two, they should be happy that Virginia actually won an ACC regular season title. Did it go sideways after that? You didn't get to finish the ACC tournament. The NCAA tournament was obviously disappointing. I get all that. But if you are somehow unhappy about the entirety of this basketball season, I can't help you. That's a you problem.
Thanks, David. Mike?
Yeah, I agree. And a little bit it gets into semantics, but when the question is, should they be happy about the season that the Hoos gave them? Yeah, what the Hoos gave them was outstanding. Like David said, it was an ACC regular season title. It was a team that had a little dip past the midpoint of the season and recovered. There was a lot to be happy about with what Virginia gave the fans. Now, fans can be very disappointed in what COVID took away from them, right?
Sure.
I mean, Virginia wins that absolute thriller against Syracuse. They're the number one seed. Maybe an ACC tournament championship in their future. I mean, we were really looking forward to watching them play that next night. So the things that you can be unhappy or disappointed in, I don't think it has to do with the players and the team and their effort or performance. COVID took away a lot from a lot of people this year, a lot that was more important than sporting events. But at the end of the year, looking back, like David said, the fact that we as media saw as many games as we did, and if you're a Virginia fan, the fact that you saw as many wins as you did, absolutely, I take it. I think they should be very happy, and I think that the fans in Blacksburg should be very happy with not just the season they had, but the direction that Mike Young has that program pointed. Now, I'm not sure where to start with this one either, because at one point in the Hokies game, that was the game at Hinkle Fieldhouse against Florida, they were in control of things. They were up by double figures. They looked like they were on their way to advancing, and then came a collapse, and then came a comeback, and then came a shining moment from Naheen Aline, who just had an unbelievable game, I thought, in his NCAA tournament debut, and then the disappointment of overtime. So, David, you're the Hall of Famer. I'll defer to you. Where do you want to start to break down this game?
Well, what I thought was interesting, Mike, was after the game, when we were talking with Mike Young, he had to adjust his glasses as he looked at the stat sheet and at Florida's shooting percentage. And I understood, because for the most part, the Hokies defended Florida really well. But then you look at that stat sheet and the Gators shot 56 That's the best that any opponent shot against Virginia Tech all season. And that step back three that Trey Mann, who, by the way, I noticed on Twitter has reportedly he's headed for the NBA draft, and I can see after watching him why. But yes, Cordell Pemsel was caught in a switch there, but he's draped all over that kid, and he just steps back and nails that three to essentially clinch it. And I was like, wow, what are you supposed to do there? And like you said, Virginia Tech's up 10 or 11 in the first half. You knew Florida would make a run, but then Virginia Tech counters. But losing Aluma and Mutz in overtime to fouls just hamstrung them too much, crippled them.
Yeah, it was interesting because you go back in the box scores years from now and you say, oh, that's disappointing. That was the team's worst defensive effort of the season when you look at Florida's shooting numbers. And that just, as David said, that wasn't the case. They were dialed in defensively. The first possession, they nearly forced a shot clock violation. And but Florida just hit contested shots, just not what you expect when you play that level of defense. And here was Mike Young after the game on what he expected and what he got.
Sometimes in this business, what you think you're going to see and how things are going to play out in terms of pace, in terms of either end of the floor isn't exactly what you get. This has been a really good Virginia Tech rebounding team. They out rebounded us by a pretty good clip, and just couldn't get stops. Up 8, we miss a layup. They score. We're where we want to be. We're in good shape. Didn't handle some things very well, but I thought Florida played awfully well, and they won. They advanced. We go back to Blacksburg, and that's hard to swallow.
David, they go back to Blacksburg with a bunch of guys who now have NCAA tournament experience, a bunch of guys that I would be stunned if they're not back in that event next year, certainly. I want to talk about one of them, though, Naheem Aline, and the game he had. In the short time we were there in the bubble, one of the most memorable performances of the tournament, 28 points, and he hit a three-pointer, a walk-up three with about 1.4 seconds to go that forced the overtime. We've seen him as a streaky shooter kind of get hot and take over for stretches, but I don't know that we've seen a game like that from Naheem Aline. It was his career high in points. David, how impressed were you with his play?
Well, and the fact, Mike, he was hunting his shot now. And that technical foul that Ron Groover called on Aline there in the second, that fired him up. And he told us that after the game, and he didn't understand why he got the tee, but it was worth the 1 point because I think Florida split the 2 free throws. And I know you could say, oh, if it wasn't for that 1 point, we'd have won in regulation. No. That tee really did motivate Naheem Aline to the point where he took over.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I did have a few people who said, oh man, you take that point off the board. And I agree with you. I think if you take that point off the board, you probably take a bunch of the 28 off the board. Sometimes we make too much of that in our hunt for a good story. This is not one of those cases, right? Naheem came out and said it. That fired me up. He didn't understand it. It upset him. It got him going. Now, every kid's a little different. We've been around and covered guys who, when something like that gets under their skin, it gets in their head and their game's off, right? It goes the other direction. So I think in terms of going forward, that's a really good sign that we know that Naheem Aline is he's the kind of tiger that when you pull his tail, you know what you're going to get. That's great news. And more great news is there's a lot of talent coming back in this program, David.
There absolutely is. And Mike Young said after the game that he expected essentially the entire roster to come back. Now, we've since learned that Joe Mamasil from the 804 is hitting the transfer portal, and we can talk more about that in a while. But still, no, there's a lot of talent coming back, headlined by Keve Aluma, and Storm Murphy is coming in as a graduate transfer from Mike Young's old haunt. At Wofford, he's nearly a 20-point-a-game guy. He's a shooter. I have to think that contributed to Bamisil's decision to exit. But yes, I think this is clearly an NCAA tournament caliber team next season.
How much of Murphy coming do you think is the success Mike had with Aluma, with Hunter Couture, the success of Carlik Jones at Radford? In other words, Mike's first year, it made sense to get what he could get, right? He was trying to rebuild a roster. He doesn't have to take Wofford guys anymore. He's established in the ACC, but he's done some great things with those Wofford guys. How much do you think that the way it played out for Aluma and Justin Mutz from Delaware and some of the other guys I mentioned, how much do you think that played into expectations now for Storm Murphy?
I think it played into it a bunch, but also I think Mike Young knows some of those Wofford cats can play, right?
Yeah.
And they won 30 games or however many it was his last season there, and beat Seton Hall in the NCAA tournament and took Kentucky to the wire. Now, just because it says Wofford on the jersey doesn't mean they're not capable. Or just because it says Radford on the jersey doesn't mean that Carlik Jones can't be first team All-ACC at Louisville.
Joe Bamisil now was a very promising prospect. Will probably go on, to have success wherever he goes. Is this just college basketball now? Kids aren't going to wait for minutes till their junior year. Is that just a thing of the past, at least at the Power 5 level?
It's not just the Power 5 level, Mike, and it's not just college basketball. It's college sports. And it's going to be more pronounced this year because, number one, it was a free year. It doesn't count against your eligibility clock. And number two, with the upcoming waiver that the NCAA is going to pass. And here's another reason, and we both know Brendan Marks, who covers covers the Triangle schools for The Athletic. And he made a really good point in a piece today that sometimes the campus experience will keep an athlete from transferring, that will ease their frustration and ease their angst about maybe not getting the playing time that they would have wanted. Nobody had a campus experience this year, Mike. They've essentially been in lockdown. And I think that compounds the impatience, that compounds the anxiety and frustration, and I think is going to fuel the transfer market even more.
Yeah, we've seen a mad rush of guys into the portal, and I think you're absolutely right that, just think about from a mindset standpoint. If every day you go to class and you practice and you see your friends and you hang out in the dining hall or you walk campus and there's a lot going on. And, at the end of the night, yeah, you may be frustrated with your playing time, but you may be happy or thinking about other things, other parts of just normal college life. I thought about this a lot. If you're a guy who's not playing, not even just not playing the minutes you think, but some of these guys who, don't get into games at all. And we talk about the sacrifice of like the green team at UVA. Imagine being a guy going through everything that they put college athletes through this year, but knowing that, you weren't getting on the floor, that wasn't your thing. You were a practice player. The level of commitment to get through the year for those guys, to me, is remarkable.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely, no doubt. And it takes an admirable degree of selflessness to do that.
Yeah, and I don't know who made this point, but I saw it on Twitter. Basically, if you're one of those guys who does the way too early top 25 list right after the Final Four, you might want to wait till the portal shakes itself out, because we have no idea in many regards who's going to be where. We've already seen it big time hit North Carolina, right? So I think we're in for a very interesting offseason.
No doubt. And no one will be immune. No one.
So, David, I'll ask you the same question that we talked about in the Take It or Leave It segment. How should Tech fans feel about year 2 under Mike Young overall?
Very encouraged. Who would have thought NCAA tournament in the second year for Mike Young's program? Now, granted, he took over a team that had just been to the Sweet 16, but that team lost its top 5 scores. And the leading returning scorer and rebounder, by the way, was Wabisa Beatty. And hey, he's terrific as a point guard, as a quarterback, as a defender, but he's essentially a 3.3 rebound a game guy. That's not what you want to be your centerpiece, your building block. But that's what Mike Young was left with, and he within 2 years has a team in the NCAA tournament. I mean, again, if anyone who wears maroon is unhappy with that, I can't help you.
This is Mike Young took a team to the NCAA tournament the fastest of any Tech basketball coach in the program's history. And you make a great point about, the program was in great shape because it was a Sweet 16 program and name recognition and branding and all that. But the roster was a mess. And I think Mike Young rebuilt this thing way more rapidly than either of us anticipated. He did it, yes, with some transfers, but they're guys who, and not just because of the year, they're guys who could play more than 1 year. And so I think he's building it the right way. I know long-term he doesn't want to rely on transfers and grad transfers and all that. But like we said, that's partially, it's the way of the world now. And I think he's also positioned himself with Naheem Aline, with Jalen Cone, who was out with the injury, Hunter Couture. I think there are really good young pieces that he's brought in himself. And yeah, I think it's all encouraging. It should be all happiness if you're a Tech fan, which is emotionally the polar opposite of what VCU fans had to endure. And I don't think through any fault of VCU or Mike Rhodes. I think this is just our reality in COVID. But David, you and I had just got to Assembly Hall to cover the Virginia game that night against Ohio. And, our emails, they pop in at the same time. And I think we kind of looked at each other, finding out that VCU's game had been canceled because of COVID issues in the Rams program. It was going to be a walkover. Oregon gets to advance. VCU, they have to go home. The team flies home. The guys who tested positive, they've got to take what had to be just a miserable bus ride home. David, what are you going to remember about that moment and finding out that, hey, one team is out of the NCAA tournament for COVID here at this point, and it's the VCU Rams?
Yeah, your heart just sank. I mean, and it would have for any team, but obviously it struck us more because it's, in the town where we work and it's people we know, and that just magnified it. And you and I have talked about this during the week, and we talked about it that night. The fact that Mike Rhodes and Ed McLaughlin within the hour were answering questions on Zoom from reporters about all this in a moment that pardon my language here, it sucked for them. That whole experience was awful. And yet there they were on camera doing their best within the bounds of privacy to explain to folks what had transpired here. And I give them a huge round of applause for that transparency.
Yeah, that was, they're classy guys. That was a first-class moment. And if ever there was a moment where if the sports information director said, hey, can you give the guy a break? I think we would have said, yeah, okay, we can give Mike Rhodes a break right now. And I think their fans have to really appreciate, just hearing from them because, they're hurting too at the same point. And that feeling that I thought Mike Rhodes and Ed McLaughlin gave the fans of we're hurting together, I think is going to be a valuable thing for their program going forward. But on that day, just miserable. And I'll be honest, David, that the sinking feeling I got was, is this just going to be the first? Is there more to come? And that brings us to, a slightly revised edition of Who You Got. It's going to be how many you got.
Thank you, Mike. VCU had to leave the tournament following an outbreak of the coronavirus. They were the first team We hope they're the last. What do you guys think? How many more teams will have to drop out of the tournament due to COVID before the nets are cut down in Indianapolis? How many you got? Let's start with Mike.
I was feeling really good about things going in, but from everything we've heard, VCU did nothing wrong, right? There's no incident or moment where they messed up and caused this, which means if it could hit them, it could hit anybody. I think they're doing a nice job. Teams have their own floors and hotels and everything they're doing to space and cleanse the arenas. I don't think it's going to be many, but I think we would be naive to think that we're done with this storyline. I'm going to peg the number at 2. I'm going to say at least 2 more teams have to back out, have to cancel a game. I hope it's not more than that. I'd love it if it's less. But right now in my head, my over-under number is 1.5, and I'd take the over at 2.
Okay, thanks, Mike. David?
I'm going to go under. I'm trying to be optimistic here. There's 15 games left. 51 have been played. 1 had to be declared a no contest. I'm gonna say none. I'm gonna say they're gonna get through this and make it happen. I have no reason, let's put it this way: I have no logical reason for thinking that, because we're quite a ways from April 5th, and you just it can't happen like the night before the championship game, or you just or at that point do they just postpone? That's what you don't know is how much wiggle room do they have here with the schedule.
Would you be in favor, David, if we got to national semifinals? There's 4 teams left. You're the Final Four, and one of the teams in the time between the Elite 8 and the Final Four tests positive. Would you be in favor of pushing the whole thing back rather than giving somebody a walkover into the title game?
100%.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's been an odd year. It's been unusual. Everything's different. And to me, if you can get 4 teams on the floor for the Final Four, that's got to be the ultimate goal. And, nobody knows the right way to do it. Nobody knows exactly how to approach it. And I thought that came up, and you wrote about this with the A-10 and the way they adjusted their tournament schedule. Mm-hmm. And then obviously we see what happened here with VCU. A lot of people, I think, pointed to the title game in Dayton as maybe where this started. So, David, I know you had a chance to talk to people about this and write about this. What's your take on that? I mean, did the A-10 kind of mess things up here, or is this just the way it was going to unfold?
Mike, I'm trying to trace the source of a COVID infection, to me, and I think to scientists, is literally a fool's errand. And it's way too convenient to say this happened in Dayton. And if it happened in Dayton, why didn't St. Bonaventure have issues too? Because St. Bonaventure was in the NCAA tournament. St. Bonaventure got to play. So I'm not convinced that this somehow transpired because the A-10 played its championship game on Selection Sunday. And it could the infection could have occurred back in Richmond. It could have occurred in Indianapolis. There's absolutely no way. And those who would try to link this to Roger Ayers, mm-hmm. the official who worked the A-10 title game, who's had a hell of a battle with COVID and has been really sick from this. To me, that's grossly unfair. He was tested the day before the game. He flew in. He quarantined. There's nothing else he could have done. So I just think all those linkages are specious at best.
Yeah, and before we move on, we both send our best, I know, to Roger, and hope for a speedy and complete recovery because, having been through this, COVID hits everybody differently. And it sounds like certainly it's hit him quite hard.
100%. You're absolutely right, Mike.
Now, looking at the tournament itself, and our teams are out of it, and we have questions about what's next. But upsets abound in Indy. Everyone's bracket, honestly, except for mine, which is oddly doing fine, which maybe tells you that it's more luck than skill. People's brackets are in shambles. David, what happened that first weekend in Indy? Is this COVID related or was just a wild tournament?
Well, first, Mike, quit teasing us. If your bracket is fine, who do you have in the Final Four?
So I've got 3 of my 4. I have Alabama, Arkansas, and Gonzaga left.
Wow. Arkansas, an inspired pick there.
As you pointed out, I'm oddly a big SEC guy. But with all the talk about the Big Ten and the Big 12 and all our coverage of the ACC, it was the SEC teams that captured at least my bracket heart. So we'll see if Gonzaga, if those 3 make the Final Four and Gonzaga wins, then I'm in the money, as they say. So I'll, when we're allowed to, I'll take you out for a margarita. But
there you go.
But beyond that, what do we see? I mean, you tweeted a stat about the number of upsets in this tournament compared to other years. Where are we at, and why is it happening?
Well, it's the most improbable collection of Sweet 16s ever based on seeds. I mean, the total seeds of the 16 teams adds up to 94. The previous record was 89 in 1986, and this is nearly double the seed total from just 2 years ago in 2019 when it was all chalk. All the 1s, 2s, and 3s advanced to the Sweet 16 in 2019. And this year we saw the polar opposite. And I think part of it you can relate to the pandemic simply because of the scheduling this season included dramatically fewer non-conference games, which made it more difficult for the committee to not only evaluate teams in terms of tournament selection, but in terms of their seeding. And that may have been a cause for all these upsets. I mean, but still, come on, Oral Roberts in the Sweet 16. I mean, who saw that coming? But hey, Max Abmas, their point guard, he's the leading scorer in the country. He's averaging 24.5 points a game and went for 55 total in Indianapolis in 2 rounds.
Yeah, and I got to say, in such a hard sports year, I think fans are enjoying it. And the nice thing about having this many upsets is you'll get some more competitive games at the Sweet 16 level. The problem with upsets in the NCAA tournament in the first and second round is they usually result in some team that doesn't deserve to be in the Sweet 16 just getting it put on them by some team that absolutely belonged in the Sweet 16. And this year, we've got enough of these high and middle seeds that I think we're going to get some more exciting and intense. We've seen so many close games, David, even the ones we covered, very competitive. I think we're going to get more of that. So of the group that we've got, who's your biggest surprise that's reached the Sweet 16?
No question, it's Oral Roberts. I mean, talking about the fourth place team, from the Summit League, or maybe it was 5th, but either way, not among the top 3 in the Summit League, and came from off the grid to win the conference tournament, and then upset Ohio State and then Florida in back-to-back games. And we were talking earlier about should UVA fans be happy about this? Imagine you're an Ohio State fan. The Buckeyes had this awesome regular season. They're a number 2 seed, and they go down in the opening round. So it's not like the Cavaliers were in some kind of small club. Purdue, goes down to North Texas in the first round. Texas and Shaka Smart goes down to Abilene Christian after having won the Big 12 tournament. So, these things, it is the way of March.
No doubt. And Oral Roberts was 4th in the Summit League. David, the Superpowers, the Blue Bloods that they finished behind in the standings, the South Dakota State Jackrabbits, the South Dakota Coyotes, and the North Dakota State Bison. So, yeah, what a great story. And again, a good reminder that if you have a great player who gets hot, a lot of good things can happen for you in March. So let me ask you this. Who do you like going forward? Give us. I shared with you my pre-tournament Final Four. West Virginia was my 4th that's already out. But who do you like going forward? Give us your Final Four now with your revised bracket, if you will.
Well, my original Final Four were Gonzaga, Florida State. So I have those two left. I had Ohio State and Illinois on the right side of the bracket. So they are obviously toast. Of the remainder, so then I would revise and I would keep Florida State and Gonzaga, and then I would add Baylor and Syracuse.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a good line. Now, I'm interested, looking at the ACC, and you say Florida State there. I like Florida State's path now, and it's Michigan, correct, is the one seed in their region? And I thought, with all due respect to Michigan, I thought they were the flimsiest of the one seeds. In part, losing a guy to injury at that time of year is so tough. But what do you think now of that path? And then what do you think of the ACC overall in this tournament? Because the other one that we didn't mention that's still alive is Syracuse, and I don't think many of us would have picked that as here are the two that are left from the ACC.
Well, Syracuse as a double-digit seed is golden. I mean, it's amazing. Since Syracuse joined the league, it is essentially a 500 team against ACC competition. It's a little bit above that because they were so good their first season. But since, they've been just middling. But Jim Boeheim in the NCAA tournament since joining the ACC, they are 10-4. That's just so good. And they've been to a Final Four in that time. They've been to an Elite Eight, and now they're back in the Sweet 16. And what makes it even cooler is that their best player these two games was the coach's son. And to watch Buddy and Jim celebrate together, tugs at the heartstrings of anybody, especially parents. So that's really cool. And the Michigan Florida State game to me is the best Sweet 16 game out there. And oh, by the way, it's the only one that is chalk. It's 1 versus 4, just as bracketed. It's the only one of the 8 games that has the 2 highest seeds possible.
And that's remarkable. And I think we're both a little disappointed that we'll be watching all these games from home, but also still a lot of fun to get back into that role of sitting on the couch and taking in basketball the way so many people in this country do at this time of year. David, before we get out of here, a football note. Virginia Tech has decided they're not going to hold their annual spring game. So this will be 2 years in a row now for Hokies fans without getting into Lane to see the spring game. Big deal or no?
Well, it's a big deal to fans. Because they're itching for the chance to get inside Lane Stadium, to see the team, maybe do a little tailgating. But Mike, this was not an athletic department decision. This was made in concert with Blacksburg officials, with campus officials. And I know it came just hours before Governor Northam eased restrictions on outside gatherings. But I've talked to several people at Virginia Tech, and the campus was broadsided by that. They had no idea it was coming. Now, you can argue that there should be a better line of communication between the state capitol and Burris Hall, and I would not disagree. But nor do I disagree that inviting 20,000 or 10,000 people onto your campus to party right now and have a tailgate is a very good idea.
Yeah, I think 2 things there. Well, 3. 1, I completely agree with you on the communication with the state, because I've been irked this whole time by the fact that the Attorney General's office won't weigh in on the FERPA and the privacy when it comes to the COVID data. And that's a topic for another day, but the Attorney General's office is letting each institution, even though they're state schools, kind of interpret it on their own. And you have one school at Tech that views it one way, one school at UVA another way, JMU, all these different interpretations. So that's, again, a topic for another day. 2, I think we both heard the reports out of Blacksburg coming out of St. Patrick's Day were not great in terms of how maybe the younger members of the community handled COVID safety during St. Patrick's Day. I think that didn't help with any push or pushback to try to get a spring game. But the most important thing, David, in terms of the topic is the spring game isn't very important for football teams and coaches. Like you said, it's for the fans. And I think most coaches, and we heard this from Bronco Mendenhall his first few years at UVA, hey, they'd rather have a 15th practice. They'd rather have that extra than having to come up with a format and do scrimmaging in a different way. In terms of getting your football team ready standpoint, I don't think this hurts the Hokies at all.
No, not in the least. And I'm sure that Justin Fuente is just as happy. I'm sure that he understands the need to engage with the community at large and the fan base. And he certainly appreciates them and can't wait to see them in Lane Stadium for the opener against North Carolina. But I think this was the prudent decision.
He appreciates and understands the need to engage with the fan base certainly a little more after that press conference we heard earlier this year. Whit Babcock announced he'd be staying and made a point of bringing that up on a couple of multiple occasions. So I think you're right that message has certainly gotten home for him. And everybody wants to be back. And I think the hope now is do everything right and hope that we can be back to quasi-normal for the fall, because I tell you, David, I cannot wait to be inside a full Lane Stadium for a football game, a full venue of any kind. It's just going to be refreshing.
Oh, it sure will. Just to have your ears ring. I may get outside the press box, at least for the start, just to hear how loud it is.
Yeah, and Enter Sandman will be something special the first time you can get fans back in that building. Well, thanks for listening. You can subscribe to Teel and Barber on Apple Podcasts or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And please consider supporting local journalism with an online subscription to the TD. You can find special promotional offers available at richmond.com. Today's show was produced by Dean Hoffmeyer. Teel and Barber is a podcast of the Richmond Times-Dispatch and richmond.com. For David Teel, I'm Mike Barber. Thanks for listening. Be healthy and safe. Enjoy March Madness, and please join David and me again next week.